I'm going to move right on now to introduce Diane Webster. Diane has been with the Prader-Willi Research Foundation of Australia since 2016, when she joined the team as the research director. In her role, she has helped to develop and maintain a pipeline of research projects with a focus on real-life outcomes for people with PWS. The research program now encompasses 2 independent projects in epigenetics, plus a core infrastructure of a chromosome 15 biobank. The Prader-Willi Research Foundation of Australia plays a very supportive position in enabling clinical trials, both locally and internationally. So, Diane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, James. Okay, so first I would like to thank you for the opportunity to come along and talk with you all today. Not sure it'll be evening or morning in various locations. I'm joining you from Melbourne, which is in Australia, and I'm specifically on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, so I would like to acknowledge that and pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. So the challenge I'm going to speak to today is how we can improve enrolment in clinical trials or clinical trial participation. So I'll give a brief introduction and then I have some questions that we can discuss as a group. I'm very interested to get feedback from you all. So all research, whether it's basic or applied, helps us move closer to new therapies for Prader-Willi syndrome. Even if it doesn't have a direct therapeutic outcome, it can help us better understand the basic biology, and that's what we've heard from Anthony earlier this evening. And in turn, those basic science discoveries can lead to the identification of new targets, which we can attempt to find drugs for. It also supports the ability to rationally design drugs that might become therapies. There's a number of very well-defined steps in the pathway from getting from basic science and the lab all the way through to the clinic. So the first step is with that discovery, that initial discovery, is turning it from a discovery into a therapy. And Anthony talked about that beautifully in terms of the schizophrenia genes. Once you know what the genes are, that's the discovery, then you can look at those pathways and begin to develop whether it's small molecules or RNAs or different sorts of compounds that might then be a drug that targets that pathway. So as the compound moves through this R&D pathway, it gets optimized, it's refined into an actual drug. And there are a large number of preclinical trials which are done to look at the safety, the toxicity, and the efficacy in mouse models and other cell models until we eventually get to clinical trials. There was an ECHO session in December last year by Dr. Natalie Kadanjian. She's presented an excellent overview of the clinical trial process. And I would encourage you, if you'd like to learn, have more detail, that's a very, very good talk describing how the various steps in the clinical trial process work. So have a look at that. But briefly, a new drug begins in phase 1. I got that here, there we go. Begins in phase 1. Phase 1 trial might have 5, 10 participants. It's a very small trial, primarily looking at safety. From there, you'll move through phase 3, which is a large number of individuals, and finally into a phase 3, which in Prader-Willi syndrome could have between 120 or 150 individuals. So large numbers for a Prader-Willi cohort, but small numbers compared to the sort of tens of thousands of people, for example, that you've seen in a COVID-19 vaccine trial. At the end of phase 3, you're looking at regulatory approvals, so whether that's the TGA in Australia, the FDA in the United States, or is it the EMA, I think, over in Europe. Once it's been approved, then there's ongoing monitoring, and that's often referred to as a phase 4. Unfortunately, the process is very inefficient, and a large number of potential drugs don't make it all the way through these various phases. Sometimes that's because they don't work. Sometimes it's because the evidence is hard to collect. What's really interesting, I think, is that we have the potential to accelerate this pathway. We have more basic science which is feeding into this, there are more and more companies who are investing in the clinical trials, and we're seeing them looking at a broader and broader range of Prader-Willi symptoms. So it's no longer just hyperphagia. There's anxiety, there's exercise, there's sleep, there's temper tantrums, and that's just naming a few. Now, every single one of these trials, even the unsuccessful ones, teach us more about what's going on, and they teach us more about how to get a therapy to market. What we need now is we need one of those trials to make it all the way through. That first therapy will provide a degree of certainty, and that certainty will attract more companies, more investment, and that will get more therapies and more choices coming out the other end of that pipeline. So we're close to having a little bit more information around what's going to get a therapy through, which is great. This brings us to the challenge. I don't have a note, no more slides, sorry. With this increase in trials that we've seen in the last few years and hopefully going forward into the future, we have both a challenge and an opportunity. So as you can see, a phase 2 trial might involve 30 to 40 people. Phase 3 could be 150. Now imagine you've got half a dozen trials going on around the world, and you start to put pressure on the community to find enough people to actually participate in these trials to get the results that are needed to go forward. So to achieve these numbers, companies will often open multiple trial sites, often in multiple countries. So they won't just be in the US, they'll be in the US, they'll be in the UK, maybe France, possibly Australia, in order to find enough individuals to complete their recruitment or to meet their targets. Recruitment at a single site could be as small as 4 or 5 individuals. Now, the costs associated with that are huge, but more importantly, it can take years to meet these recruitment targets. Falling short on recruitment targets can have devastating effects to the trial endpoints and regulatory approvals that follow that. But equally important is making sure that the right people are enrolling in the right trials. And that's more than just the inclusion criteria. It's about making sure that it's a good fit. You have the right to drop out of a trial, to withdraw from a trial at any point. And you should do that if you feel that that's the decision you need to make. But if you can ask questions at the beginning of a trial to mean that you don't have to drop out partway through, then that's much better for the trial design. It's also better for you, because if you dropped out, something wasn't right either. So if you can avoid that by asking questions at the beginning, then we're getting the right people into the right trials. An example of that might be, a trial design that requires 6 half-day visits. So the sort of questions you might ask is, can you afford to take that time off school or off work? How far will you have to travel? Is that something that you can reasonably commit to, given everything else that's going on in your life? Because if you only do 5 of the 6 visits, they may not be able to include your data in the analysis. And that has consequences for whether they meet the endpoints of the study. So you can think, I guess it's thinking about participation in a clinical trial as a little bit like matchmaking. We need to get the right people enrolled in the right trials in order to accelerate Prader-Willi research and get therapies through. So my challenge for discussion today is, how can we accelerate the development of new drugs by improving enrollment in clinical trials? And I've broken down 4 questions to help us with the discussion. So part of this, I think, is letting people know. It's just reaching more people in our community. How can we get in touch with the families who are not on our mailing lists to let them know that these trials are happening? And if they're interested, to be able to then talk further. My second question would be, what's not working? What are the barriers to participation? One notable barrier is that the hyperphagia questionnaire needs to be completed in English, I believe. So there's a language barrier. We're often told that Australia is an attractive destination for clinical trials because we speak English. But there are large populations throughout the world which, who could potentially participate in clinical trials if this was a barrier we addressed. I'd also be really interested to hear from you what you think might be working. What are the facilitators in this space? And finally, any comments or feedback around the matchmaking, finding the right trials for people who are interested in participating.